But now I'd like to introduce online from Japan, Minoru Kiuchi, Minister in charge of Economic Security of Japan. Minister, can you see us and hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hey, this is Tokyo. Good afternoon and good morning to all of you in Brussels. First, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Šefčovič for recommending me as today's speaker. I am Minoru Kiuchi, Japan's Minister in charge of Economic Security. Let me tell you a little about myself. Due to my father's overseas assignment, I spent part of my childhood in Germany, and I have lived there for nearly 10 years in total, including some time as a Foreign Service official. Since becoming a member of the Japanese Diet in 2003, I have held various foreign affairs-related positions, including State Minister for Foreign Affairs and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Having visited Europe almost every year, I'm particularly committed to strengthening cooperation between Japan and Europe. Today, I'm honored to have the opportunity to deliver a speech at the Brussels Economic Security Forum. Unfortunately, as you can see, I'm unable to attend in person due to the ongoing session of the Diet. First, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the European Policy Center, particularly to Mr. Fabian Zulek, Chief Executive and Chief Economist, and to everyone involved for their efforts. Also, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to meet virtually with Commissioner Šefčovič again today, following our previous meetings in Brussels and Tokyo. I'm glad that we have been able to meet once a month recently. Furthermore, I found both This forum provides a valuable opportunity to delve into the challenges and opportunities of international cooperation at the intersection of economics and security. I look forward to sharing Japan's experiences and policies today.
Thank you very much, Minister.
In today's world, the changing balance of power and intensifying geopolitical competition, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, are posing serious challenges to a free, open, and stable international order based on the rule of law. While economic liberalization and technological innovation have driven our economic prosperity, the post-Cold War era in which we pursued these policies faces a major turning point as the international order changes. The negative aspects of economic globalization and liberalization are becoming increasingly apparent, such as the growing trend of using economic dependence on certain countries for political gain and the theft of critical and emerging technologies. These developments have not begun in the past few years. As mentioned in the OECD report, Trade Impacts of Economic Coercion, published in May 2024. China imposed restrictions on rare earth exports to Japan in 2010. Meanwhile, the scope and content of such measures has expanded in recent years. In this context, how should we work to achieve security and prosperity in the age of economic statecraft? The purpose of economic security policy is to protect our country's economic base and the livelihoods of our people. However, we must be careful that security measures do not themselves result in the destruction of the economy, the foundation of our national strength. The greatest economic security policy is arguably to strengthen one's own country's economy. Private companies play a central role in achieving economic security by fostering competitiveness through healthy competition with domestic and foreign companies. When considering economic security policies, it is also important to maintain this competitive environment among companies from like-minded countries. From this perspective, our view is that government intervention with economic security policies should be strictly limited to areas that are genuinely security related. Looking at this from the other side, outside those strictly protected areas, free and fair economic activity should be expanded in order to achieve economic prosperity and ultimately economic security. This poses questions with no easy answers. Where should we draw the line? Which areas should a country strictly protect, and to what extent? Which technologies should a country promote? This is why it is crucial to engage in dialogue with allies, like-minded countries, experts, and the private sector when developing economic security measures. Japan has been developing its economic security policy with an eye on these considerations. I frequently discuss the issues with my counterparts from allied and like-minded countries. As I mentioned, I held two meetings with Commissioner Šefčovič in April and May.
Yeah, go on.
During my recent visit to London, I met with Mr. Douglas Alexander, British Minister of State, to discuss common challenges in the field of economic security. I'm also holding almost daily discussions with ministers visiting Japan from various countries for the Osaka Kansai World Expo. Next, I would like to talk about the current state of Japan's economic security policy. The term economic security has gradually become common in the international community. We believe this reflects a growing awareness that security and the economy are increasingly intertwined. I would like to highlight three key areas. First, there is the issue of supply chains for critical products and materials. As many businesses have focused on cost and expanded their supply chains for critical products that support people's everyday lives and economic activities overseas, the supply of such goods has become dependent on certain countries. Some countries are exploiting this situation for political gain by restricting exports of critical materials and engaging in other forms of economic coercion. Next, let's look at trends surrounding the acquisition of advanced technologies. Technological innovation is being driven by the private sector. Companies around the world are competing fiercely in areas such as AI and quantum technology. These technologies will have a significant economic and social impact, while also bringing about fundamental changes to every country's security. To reap the benefits of these technologies, it is crucial to effectively make use of them and promote research and development by combining the strength of the public and private sectors. And then there is the issue of cybersecurity. As the digital transformation progresses, the threat of cyber attacks is increasing, and there is a growing risk that the provision of electricity, water, and transportation could be compromised or interrupted. For example, in July 2023, a cyber attack hit the system at the Nagoya Port container terminal, resulting in a 3-day suspension of container loading and unloading operations. Against the backdrop of an increasingly difficult security environment, any disruption to the supply of essential goods and infrastructure services could have a significant impact on people's everyday lives and economic activity. In some cases, it could even lead to life-threatening situations. For example, factories could grind to a halt due to a lack of parts and raw materials. Vital medicines could become unavailable. Surgical operations could be cancelled, and households could be left without water or electricity. In short, the very foundations of our affluent, stable way of life would be at risk. In this context, the government has come to understand that if it does not adopt an economic security perspective that integrates security and the economy, it may no longer be able to protect its people. Against this backdrop, in 2020, we established an economic security team of experts from relevant ministries and agencies within the National Security Secretariat to take a whole-of-government approach. In 2021, a minister in charge of economic security was appointed. I'm now the third minister to hold this position. By the way, my two predecessors, both Ms. Takaichi and Mr. Kobayashi, ran in last year's LDP leadership election, aiming to become Prime Minister of Japan. As for whether I will run in the next leadership race, due to sensitive relations with certain concerned countries and the implications for economic security, that information is classified, top secret. Joking aside, and this was hold this position. Yes, the Economic Security Promotion Act was subsequently passed in 2022. I will show you. Establishing a legal framework with 4 pillars. 1, ensuring the stable supply of critical materials. 2, second, ensuring the stable provision of critical infrastructure services. 3rd, promoting the research and development of advanced technologies important to economic security. And 4th, non-disclosure of selected patent applications. Another pillar of economic security is a system to facilitate the security of information. Last month, the so-called security clearance system for economic security came into force. I believe this will not only strengthen information protection in Japan, but also expand opportunities for international business and joint research on sensitive technologies with allies and like-minded countries. As part of the implementation of the system, we have established detailed operational standards, creating an environment in which companies and researchers can work within the system without stress or worry. In addition, the Active Cyber Defense Act, passed on the day of the entry into force of the security clearance system, is another important measure for enhancing national resilience. We hope that it will strengthen cooperation with infrastructure operators and reduce the risk of critical infrastructure being shut down by cyber attacks. This will help counter advanced cyber attacks from entities associated with foreign states, such as the so-called Volt Typhoon, and prevent disruptions to daily life. Next, I would like to discuss the challenges Japan's economic security policy is facing going forward, as well as the measures that can be taken to address these issues. The Economic Security Promotion Act, passed 3 years ago, must be consistently put into practice and continuously reviewed. In light of the cyber incident involving Nagoya Port mentioned earlier, we amended the Act last year to include port transportation as a new class of critical infrastructure. Regarding critical infrastructure, I personally feel a strong sense of urgency about the medical sector, and we are holding discussions with individual medical institutions with the aim of reaching a conclusion by this summer. Ensuring the stable supply of critical materials is essential, especially in emergencies when demand surges and the government must secure the supply of materials. In such cases, relying solely on support for private companies may be insufficient to ensure the stable supply of specific critical materials. In order to address this, we have established a system called GOCO, G-O-C-O, GOCO, namely government-owned, contractor-operated. This allows the government to acquire and own facilities such as factories operated by private companies and to commission private companies to carry out the production of materials or the management of facilities as part of government operations. Ensuring the security of personal data and data centers is also an emerging national security issue. Given that, in principle, personal data is saved and managed only with the consent of each individual, we must ask ourselves what the most effective way might be to prevent that data being transferred overseas, something that has the potential to raise problems of national security. Further, what measures should be taken concerning data centers from the perspective of national security? We need to consider these questions urgently. This year marks the third anniversary of the Act, and we are considering what revisions, including the above elements, might be necessary across a range of topics. Furthermore, it is important to always look for other economic security challenges by assessing the risk faced by industries that are essential to people's everyday lives and economic activities. This is in line with the policies set out in the National Security Strategy and other documents. This includes measures such as ensuring the effectiveness of investment screening and managing the export of advanced technologies. Similarly, research, security, and integrity are important for preventing the leakage of technology and know-how. More broadly, it is also important to introduce steps to counter economic coercion. In the face of an increasingly uncertain international situation, I see that the economic and security challenges we face are wide-ranging and evolving at a rapid pace. In this context, it is essential to constantly consider next steps in order to strengthen our country's competitiveness, protect our economic and industrial base, and safeguard the livelihoods of our people, all the while keeping a close eye on the changing situation. At the same time, no country can achieve economic security alone. Cooperating with allies and like-minded countries to maintain and strengthen an international order based on shared values and rules is also indispensable for strengthening economic security. The government of Japan looks forward to engaging in discussions with the European governments, including those represented here today, on expanding cooperation in the field of economic security. We therefore hope you will consider reaching out the delegation of the European Union in Brussels, as well as other relevant diplomatic missions in your countries. In addition, the government of Japan would like to introduce our economic security system in an easy-to-understand manner so that European companies can confidently pursue international business with Japanese partners in critical areas such as infrastructure, essential goods, and advanced technologies. In order to support this, we are also preparing English language pamphlets, which we will be distributed through our diplomatic missions abroad. I'm committed to working with all of you to advance cooperation while balancing security and prosperity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minoru Kiuchi. Minister in charge of Economic Security in Japan. Thank you very much for your time and your Michel Barnier-style slides earlier as well. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Reynolds, Minister, UK Secretary of State for Business and Trade. You're very welcome to join us now on stage before we then have our panel discussion.
Thank you very much for that incredibly warm introduction. Thank you, Maros, for your fascinating opening speech. I consider myself very fortunate to have such an experienced and effective counterpart in the EU. And I'd like to take this opportunity, Maros, for your strong support and wise counsel that you've offered me since I became the UK's Trade Secretary last year. To be frank, not an easy time to become a Trade Minister, but the progress we've made on the UK-EU strategic partnership, on trade, on complex issues like steel safeguards, I think is such a positive development. Though, as you said, we should probably try and spend less time together or our families will be suspicious. As I was arriving at the hotel this morning, I made sure to stop and show my personal respect at the Monument aux Soldats Britanniques, which has stood here for 100 years. Its equivalent sits just a short walk from my office in London, and it embodies the lasting friendship between our two nations. It's a friendship which is an excellent representation of the relationships across this room and beyond. We are not allies of convenience. Our connections lie beyond treaties. Our bonds are born by shared values and shared ideals. Free trade, the rule of law, the rights of all peoples. And unfortunately, one of the harsh lessons of the early 21st century is that we cannot take those ideals for granted. Because beyond the institutions and the alliances, there is a clear divide opening up between competing geopolitical philosophies, between unilateralism and multilateralism, between isolationism and internationalism. Even in my own country, where the UK has long been a champion of economic openness and free trade, we've seen that divide play out in recent years. But this new UK government is clear upon which side we are on. The UK is an open, outward-looking, free trade-supporting nation. We adhere to the belief that we are stronger together, echoing the words of Helen Keller, that alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And that's why I'm grateful to be here today, to be among friends and allies who share this worldview. And it's why I'm grateful that we're having this meeting today, hot on the heels of the deal agreed between the UK and the European Union last month. Because whilst the British people did vote to leave the European Union, they did not vote for division in our defence. They did not vote for bureaucracy to block our brilliant businesses in the UK and the EU from trading widely in goods and services. And they did not vote for young people to lose the wealth of opportunities that travel brings. It's said that good fences make good neighbours. But the UK and Europe should not be. They cannot be. And they are not just neighbours. We're friends. And your success is our success and vice versa. And we will always believe that to be the case. The deal between the UK and the EU was, of course, not the only deal that we signed in May. We've been pretty busy, having also signed agreements with the US and India. Deals that lower tariffs, open markets, and commit to cooperation that will be good for all parties. The deals we've made, I hope, go a long way to show that the UK seeks to be one of the best positioned markets in the world. And at a time of real challenge, you can depend on the UK for stability, for openness, and for a pro-growth, pro-business, pro-investment environment. But those are all the things that we want to protect. And that's why these conversations at this forum today are so important. As my Prime Minister has said, we're living in a new world, one governed less by established rules and more by deals and alliances. In a world like that, true friendships are like gold dust. The events of the last few years have made it clear that no nation can take its economic security for granted. And because economic security is national security, it's imperative that we take the necessary steps to increase our resilience, our independence, and our strength. In the UK, we're pursuing both an industrial strategy and a trade strategy with sustainability and security at the core. We want to be a growth-focused state, promoting a broad industrial base that is resilient to shocks and where economic threats can be mitigated. But that only works if we partner with the friends we know we can rely upon. That's why in March I was myself in Japan for our economic 2+2, where we agreed an industrial strategy partnership to support growth and economic resilience in both of our industrial sectors. This includes close cooperation on trade and manufacturing, especially within our space and defence industries, where we know there is huge potential for growth. And with our partners in the EU, we're putting our heads together. We're speaking with one united voice to insulate our businesses from shocks that may be caused by hostile actors seeking unfair advantages. In our security and defence partnership, we've agreed to have regular discussions on our national approaches to economic security, on top of the strong foundations we've built in the G7. We've also agreed to regular ministerial meetings on our shared strategic interests, supporting the international order, human rights, and free and fair trade. These values are the foundation of several critical defence partnerships between the UK, the EU, NATO, and other like-minded allies. And we have to use every tool at our disposal to uphold them. So how do we actually do that? Well, we're taking advantage of our shared membership of institutions like the G7 to embody the international principles that we hold dear: transparency, diversification, security, sustainability, trustworthiness, and reliability. and we're working to secure and improve resilience in our supply chains. In many areas, the supply chains of Western economies are interdependent. So if one of us is cut, the other will bleed. So it's not just in our best interest to cooperate, but to work hand in glove towards our shared objectives. And we hope that, having now taken steps to strengthen our relationship with the EU, we can work with European allies and beyond, pressing on to tackle those areas where we have mutual concerns, to share information, to strengthen business connections, and to minimise disruptions, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. That's why we remain fully committed to the international principles for resilient and reliable supply chains agreed in Japan 2 years ago and reiterated in every presidency since. And we're continuing to support the wider endorsement of these principles by all forward-leading trading partners in the G20, the WTO, and the OECD. We're also ensuring our export control systems remain closely aligned. Controlled military and dual-use technologies are only being licensed for export if they satisfy the strictest criteria, including respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. And finally, we're bringing our full collective power to bear in addressing global trade issues. As Maros said, we know harmful subsidies and unfair behaviour by state-owned enterprise continue to undermine free and fair trade. They're preventing businesses from competing on a level playing field, but sadly these practices are on the rise. And this, friends, if we're being frank, is for me the key question of economic security. That if we do not have a conversation about the global imbalances that we're all familiar with, if there is not an economic case for production of key industries, key technologies across all of the European continent, that will leave us vulnerable. And this is where I believe the principal concerns of the US also lie, concerns that are shared on both sides of the political divide in the US, and which I believe there could be common ground and engagement upon. The UK will always stand side by side with our allies to combat these practices and to hold the line against their proliferation. Because if we do not, market distorting practices will make us more vulnerable to shocks and to hostile action. Through our membership of CPTPP, for example, we've supported joint ministerial statements upholding the rules-based trading system and transparency obligations that shed light on those practices. And we're also keen to pursue new initiatives at the WTO itself and in other forums to increase transparency and hasten dispute resolution. We know that plurilaterals, for example, could be a powerful tool in enabling countries to make meaningful progress on areas of importance across the WTO membership, progress which might otherwise have been blocked due to a lack of movement on longer-standing issues. The agreements on e-commerce and on investment facilitation for development are clear evidence of that. But we do recognise that reforming and repositioning the WTO so that it can respond more effectively to the challenges of today is the only way to safeguard long-term stability and growth tomorrow. Our eyes are fixed on greater flexibility in decision-making, greater openness in the use of plurilaterals, and building a fully functioning dispute settlement system. For the UK's part, we will continue to do everything, whether it's bilateral, plurilateral, or at the multilateral level, to ensure that global trade works, and it works for all. These are just some of the specifics of the broader point I want to end on. That whilst the world has changed, it is changing, and it's going to change more quickly in future, and that climate is uncertain and volatile. The trees that survive the storms aren't the tallest, they're the ones whose roots are intertwined with their neighbours. The deeper those roots go, the more connected they are, the stronger the forest becomes. And that's why that monument outside moved me so much this morning. Friends, our roots are deep, and together I know we can grow through this storm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. We've had three excellent statements to kick us off. I suggest we get cracking with the conversation. So, Minister, if you could take a seat here. May I also call up, back up Commissioner Šefčovič, and together with our two politicians, I would like to call up also Ilse Henne, who is the Chief Executive Officer of ThyssenKrupp Materials and sits on the Executive Committee of ThyssenKrupp. I would like to call up Trude Mårseide, Vice President of Global Politics and Public Affairs of Equinor. And certainly I would like to call you, Joachim, back up. You need no more introduction. So please have a seat and let's get going with the conversation. It's great to have you all. Yes, please take the first seat available. Right, thank you very much for those interventions. There's a lot of things to discuss. And I was going to start, Commissioner Šefčovič, asking you whether we will get a deal with the US or not. But, but I realized listening to you that I'm not going to ask that question because I think you said what you wanted to say about it in your speech. Unless, of course, Minister Reynolds would want to come in with some advice, but we can come back to that afterwards. No, I wanted to pick up on something else you said, and you ended your conversation with a quote of Winston Churchill. And that is sort of an appeal to the gravity of the moment, I would say. And I think also Minister Kyuchi held a very dramatic speech, with some touches of humor, of course, but he spoke about really the coercion that Japan, like other countries, are in the midst of. And I think one sees reports now of the coercion China is applying when it comes to critical minerals, when it comes to rare earths. It's a problem for Japan, it's a problem for US, it's a problem for countries in Europe like Germany. And so I'm wondering, core of the question we're addressing now in the context of economic security and economic statecraft is positioning between the US and China. And it's sort of we have to decide whether we like the US value proposition or the Chinese value proposition. But I wanted to say or ask, it's the fundamental problem we're dealing with now. Is it that the US have taken a sledgehammer and broken down international rules? Is it the strategic use of overcapacity by China? Or is it something, a third thing, even deeper, that's deeply security related and the threat of conflict? And it was your quote of Churchill that made me think of this. In 1939, started one of the most extraordinary exchanges of letters in history between Churchill and Roosevelt, letters and telegrams. I think there were over 2,000 letters over their lifetime, where they discussed everything from sinking of ships to less dramatic things. What kind of moment are we in, Commissioner? Is it all of the above? Is that your mandate as Economic Security Commissioner now for the coming years?
Thank you very much, Gorgen. Concerning your first question, if I recall correctly, you've been working with Michel Barnier so much. I'm sure you rehearsed the answers with him for many times. So you know that, especially if you are in the middle of the discussion negotiation, it's very difficult to be precise, especially if you are talking about the current context. But what I think is very important to say is that, of course, we are in a little bit different position than the UK here, because our relationship with the US represent 30% of the global trade. So I think that we need to take the time and to kind of approach this relationship from the perspective of the huge responsibility, not only for the EU, but what it would kind of represent for the global economy, for the global flows. And I can assure you that economic security is a big part of the discussions we have with our US counterparts. So what we've been discussing until now is that what we are absolutely convinced would be the best outcome for the EU-US deal would be that this would be balanced approach, that it would be fair for the both sides, that it would increase the opportunity for EU and US, while of course respecting what is this new, very clear focus on reindustrialization of US. This is something what we clearly want to achieve also in the EU, and also taking into account, I would say, long-term grievances, long-term, I would say, elements where the U.S. counterparts be simply feeling that they've been not addressed for several years. So what we are doing right now is very technical and very political at the same time. Technical because we are really looking through the tariff lines, and I have to say from both sides, we are looking at different kind of permission certificates which been kind of blocked or not processed, just to simply kind of clean the slate, clear the table, and to make sure that we could move forward. And at the same time, and this is especially the area which I discussed with Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick, is what we can do from his perspective for these big five. We are talking about cars, we are talking about semiconductors, we are talking about steel, we are talking about lumber, and we are talking about pharma. And of course, these are, I would say, very, very important areas for both of us. And here, we from the EU clearly are coming from the position that in many of these sectors, we are or complementary or supporting each other. Our global chain, especially EU-US chain, is so intertwined that any obstacle in the middle of the Atlantic would simply make them less competitive and more vulnerable from the perspective of economic security. And this is, I would say, a bit of a diplomatic, political, but also very technical discussions we have. So, of course, I mean, I am, eternal optimist, and I think we've been having our ups and downs, and I think with Jonathan, we can refer to a couple of them, but we managed. And therefore, I think that here, to focus on the results, to be patient, to simply have the strategy in mind that in the end, we are absolutely convinced that the two biggest economies, representing 30% of the global trade, would be much better off if we can find a solution to our differences. That it's difficult, that it's sometimes painful, I totally subscribe to it, but I can also tell you that we spare no efforts to achieve the deal, and I think this particular week, my yesterday's conversation with Jemianson Greer, who is heading the USTR office, but also, I would say, the preliminary assessment of the discussions we had on technical level in the Washington, D.C., makes me optimistic that we can do that it will be challenging 100%, but we'll do our best to get there.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. I think the way I understand what you're saying is that you think that realities will have their own weight, also vis-à-vis the US. And some of the fundamental objectives that they are pursuing will lead them to have to work with the EU and work as allies and friends with the EU. I wanted you mentioned something, a sector, steel. It's obviously a concern in the US. It's also a concern in Europe. May I sort of then turn that original question I asked to you, Mrs. Henner. You work with ThyssenKrupp, major steel producer. You produce submarines. You produce. You're critical in clean tech. Yes. What are your major worries and concerns now when you approach this issue or discuss economic security and you see the world around us?
Yeah. We share all of the concerns that have been addressed here, but there's a perspective that I would like to introduce in this discussion, and it goes back to what Birgit says. There's fundamental change, and then there's behavioral. And what we see in terms of our allies, or used to be allies, etc. And the perspective that I would like to bring in is that, yes, it's a matter of taking time, and we need to see where we want to go long term. We need to become more proactive instead of reactive so that we reestablish certainty for companies to invest. But there's also the element of speed is a quality on its own. Mm-hmm. Yeah? There are a lot of things that we can do today, if you look at steel industry, which helps us immediately, because we are suffering immediately.
What's the problem in steel?
In Q1, only in Q1 of 2025, 36% more Chinese steel has come into Europe. 36%, yeah? And that's after Liberation Day. And we can tackle that immediately. And I'm talking about steel industry, but this also applies for certain things going on in chemical industry. So what I'm saying is we highly appreciate and we think it's the right strategy to move forward to see how we can secure global trade. But security also starts, tomorrow's security starts in making sure that industries survive today. And for the steel industry, that means simply applying a number of defense instruments that we already have. Yeah? It starts with making sure, if I may be specific, on the deal that we are at the edge of negotiating with India, there is security that, or there is a solution for a high risk that Indian steel will also be dumped following Chinese steel on the market. And there is the long discussed issue that we really are hopeful that it will be resolved in the next couple of weeks is the fact that there is still Russian steel coming into Europe today.
How much?
3 to 4 million. And it's very easy to stop that. I know it's not easy for some of our steel competitors to deal with that, but it's easy for Europe to stop that and to give a clear sign that a good internal market is one of the strengthening elements then to also have good trading. The stronger we are in Europe, the stronger our industry is, the easier it's going to be to enter in bilateral discussions with mind-liked partners and less mind-liked partners.
Are you fearing a wipeout of European steel industry? It's a term one reads now, for instance, about legacy chips.
Of course. I mean...
And you think Europe has the tools to deal with it?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, as much as we fear that steel industry is likely to disappear, which it shouldn't, because steel is, first of all, at the beginning of a long value chain. If you don't have steel anymore, there's a lot that's going to disappear. Secondly, we know that steel is fundamental for our military security. But at the same time, I do think that within Europe, with our internal market, with the innovation that we are driving, with the front role that we are playing in green industry, there is a lot that we can do to save the steel industry. Yeah.
Minister, you wanted to come in. I'm not sure you want to come in on what answers the EU needs to speed up on, but I'll give the floor nonetheless.
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think this is why, to me, those issues of overproduction, non-market practices are the core economic security issue, right? So here's a question I started thinking of. I'm almost tempted to ask for a show of hands in the room, but I won't. We were at Davos this year because it was the inauguration of the president. A lot of US exuberance, and quite hard to understand that in a way from a European perspective, the sheer negativity about the global trading system coming from the US and what that means. And I start to think this: do we think that US politics and the US political system is disrupting global trade, or do we think global trade has disrupted US politics? Because a lot of the concerns at the heart of what we are dealing with right now, and it's not easy, as I say, they're not from one administration. They're bipartisan. There is incredible resentment in parts of America, even though from a UK perspective, I think the post-war economic history of the US is about US success. But that's not how they see it, the distribution of that. And within different parts of any government, any administration, the Commission, the UK government, the White House, there'll be, as ever, differences of view. And I think one of the difficult things for us all is trying to work out exactly, is the objective of a tariff regime revenue? It was, put as to pay for domestic tax cuts at one point, or is it about a fairer, more reciprocal trading system? Because a fairer, more reciprocal trading system we can engage with a little bit more easily. The former is a bit harder to respond to. But there are parts, for instance, of USTR that would put it like this: that what the US is doing is forcing a WTO round on the world, and using its force to do that because they're sick of us talking about it and not delivering some of those reciprocal benefits. And the steel question, which we've been dealing very much with, I've been dealing very much with in the UK, there has to be good and fair and reciprocal trade creates interdependencies, not dependencies. And at the minute, there's lots of the global trading system that produces vulnerabilities that, quite frankly, are unacceptable from a political point of view. And the automotive industry is a clear example of that. Steel is an example of that. It's not old tech, and we're going to innovate and have the new. It's the future. It's the now as well. Yeah. And I think there are ways through that. It doesn't have to be a confrontational relationship. But this is the question. There has to be an economic business case for the businesses here, for us as politicians, for European industry. And it has to create those relationships, that interdependencies, as we all have with each other. It can't create strategic weaknesses. I don't think our publics would accept that, and I don't think that's a healthy economic system. That, for me, is what we've got to address.
Thank you for that. So in a sense, you're rationalizing the behavior of what's coming out of Washington, and you're pointing to the fact that this trading system we have doesn't work. It's not reciprocal, and dangers are building up. And this is something one has to deal with. And well, you've dealt with the Trump administration. You struck a deal with the Trump administration. So I think I have to pick up on that, because in that deal you've struck with the US, what remains of rules-based trade? Isn't the risk now that well, disrespect for fundamental rules-based trade principles, the disrespect for the most favored nation principle, will start traveling around the world as the US is pushing actor after another to agree preferential terms. So you're justifying the need to address some serious issues in steel and other places and talk with the Americans on this. But what's the collateral damage of that to the international economy and system? Is WTO simply dead? Is non-discrimination simply dead? How do you see this?
Look, I'll give you a politician's answer and I'll give you a real answer at the same time. Okay?
Let's have both.
So on the technical answer, the political answer, look, it's a stage one deal that then has a wider engagement, conversation, negotiation. We're still having on the reciprocal tariffs, so it's a stage one of a WTO compliant deal. The political answer is this. First of all, look, we will always in the UK be supporting a rules-based international trading order. That's both because that's the right thing to do and it's in our interests to do so. At the same time, I cannot, as the UK's business secretary, sit back as thousands of jobs are lost when, frankly, because of the existing nature of our trading relationship, I think it's a little bit easier than colleagues in the European Union to reach that framework deal. We don't have the US does not have a significant deficit in traded goods with the UK, and we're a services-led economy, so some of this, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it's easier from the UK to do that. In terms of the precedent, no, I don't think it's a dangerous one, because I think, frankly, the world right now, businesses around the world, other countries, they were looking to see, look, is there a way through this? Are there deals that can be struck, or is this simply genuinely the end of that kind of multilateral rules-based system? How will we find a way through this? I think showing that an agreement is possible is obviously a benefit to my people in the UK, but also a benefit to the rest of the world to show the kind of template that's going through. And it's not about, for the UK, picking one partner over the EU or the US. I've always been resistant to that. I think we've been proven right on that. On, for instance, the long-running conversation between the US or even, to be honest, Canada, with the EU or with the UK on food standards, that's because in the UK we have a position, the public have a position, the government has a mandate position in its manifesto to retain our existing food standards. So yes, that's easier to come to Maros and have an agreement on an SPS agreement. That's not us picking a partner, that's us making a sovereign decision as to what's in our interests and saying then to the US, well, look, if you've got a long-running dispute with European countries on this, okay, but let's find the things we can agree on. So the beef quota is a compliant one.
Trude Mossaide, can I sort of kick this question onwards to you? You're a major energy producer, critical for Europe's energy security, but you're a global actor. You're also looking for a stable system. And what sort of one has been reading in the press lately is about sort of the fight you've become embroiled in with the US administration. What's your company's perspective on the unraveling of stability, or is it something that you think one can work through? What's the lesson you've drawn from the negotiations you've been in? And maybe tell us a little bit more about the Empire case.
Yeah, well, so Equinor is a big energy supplier to a pillar of energy security to Europe, but we're also a major investor in the US and have a solid foothold there. And we invest mainly in oil and gas, but we also do renewables in the US more recently. And we had a stop work order on our big offshore wind farm outside of New York, and we had to work relentlessly for a period of time to get that lifted, and did that in collaboration with the US government, the new administration, and with local governments. And I think from our point of view, there's a bigger picture, that is that energy is needed for security. It's how we can participate and project stability into Europe and into other places where we work. And to do that, we do these massive, huge infrastructure projects, and they need to have stable frameworks. We need to be able to depend on projects that are fully permitted, that they can go ahead, even if you have a change of government or a change of political direction. And this is not something that is unique to the US. This is something that we also have experienced in Norway, where we had a major discussion in Parliament over a fully permitted project that just barely made it through. And it's that kind of instability that it makes it also more difficult for the politicians to depend on these major infrastructure projects that you also need to keep your society secure. So I think anything that we can do to keep up those, at least that trust and that ability to have security in permitting and in systems and rules and regulations, that's something that's very much needed by industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Trude. So I think your example, if I get you correctly, is you're also saying with the US administration, one can work some of these problems through, and it can be very disruptive, but one also has to be ready to stand up for legal principles and what has been agreed, and also going to court and not simply being transactional. Joachim, you put your signal you wanted to say a few words about this rules-based dimension. Of course, you worked on this in the UN for many years.
So I think we need to be slightly cautious here, if I may, because there was a really good point that you made, Jonathan. Global trade disrupted US politics, and I think that's true. The question is, why did it do that, right? I'm Swedish. We have problems with migration. It's a very thorny issue. We don't have problem with open trade. Why? Because we applied a simple principle, which was Adam Smith abroad, Keynes at home. So it actually boils down to what's your systems for managing structural adjustment. Global trade is a mechanism by which you increase structural adjustment of the economy, which drives productivity and therefore leads to better jobs. But in the process of structural adjustment, people will lose their jobs. You will have cities in the UK or in my home country, which were monocities with a single factory, which led to mass unemployment in those areas and a deeply socioeconomic deprivation spreading. And that fuels anger. And that anger we have to deal with. And that's not, we discuss a lot about Trump here. We have it across Europe as well. We have a political problem across Europe that we need to address. And that is not because of global trade. It's because if you want to spur economic growth, you're going to have to accept disruption of your economy. The question that is both on the private sector nowadays is not only a government question, it's how do we facilitate the transition? And the digital transformation is going to be the most disruptive compared to WTO or China's accession to WTO. That's nothing compared to what we see likely going to happen in digital transformation. So if we don't learn our lesson quickly and make sure that those that temporarily lose from the structural adjustment of our economies, we need to help them to regain their credibility as productive participants in the economy. And that's something that we need to take seriously. So there's a very easy path here to be over-obsessing about the US or over-obsessing about China. We, in the Western world, have failed to live up to our social contract. We need to recontract with our citizens on how do we manage through the disruption that we want to have our economy, because otherwise we cannot sustain our level of prosperity. And this is where you see, and I have a great respect for, because on steel and energy and communication sector, these are all sectors that are struggling, maybe not so much energy, frankly, but steel. If you take steel faces a cliff edge. The communication sector is a boiling frog syndrome. Europe is horribly behind in the connectivity sector. If you want a good illustration of problems of economic security, look at the latest power outage in Portugal and Spain. 94% of the Vodafone base stations in Portugal disappeared within 6 hours. People could not get news from their government around what was going on. It was pure luck that the energy system came back online before you had rampant vandalism and people taking onto the streets. We're living in an environment where we need to build much more resilient systems. And this has nothing to do with China and the US. That has to do with our responsibility towards our citizens. So we have our own homework to do in Europe. And I think that's one of the things that, the wake-up call is more in the challenge posed to us. Yeah. But we do need to recognize that the social contract in Europe has been broken, and we have a responsibility to rebuild it.
Yeah. Thank you. You're making very much also a classic economic argument. You're saying there's the social dimension of industrial transformations that need to be dealt with, but we still need open trade. And I think everybody on this panel still want open trade. But I'm wondering, isn't there another question here that is fundamentally what we're discussing, that trade is not open and fair anymore. And that's what the minister was talking about. The scale of subsidies, the scale of overcapacity is so disruptive that it doesn't work for countries across the world anymore. And industrial policies are creating new geopolitical realities that also forces us to rethink our model.
My point is not that. My point is the fact that Europe has a dying telecom industry has nothing to do with the United States. It has to do with Europe not doing its homework. The fact that you have a dying steel industry, yes, there's overcapacity, yes, there's dumping, yes, we need to address it. But it has also to do with the fact that we have a new normalized price curve on energy that actually makes energy-intensive production highly uncompetitive in Europe. That's what we need to address,
of course,
on top of the international relations.
Yeah. And a lot of what we are facing, it's not like we didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, overcapacity from China in steel industry is something that we knew was going to hit. So I'm fully with you. What we need is a plaidoyer for a more holistic approach. And that's what's going to make us successful in being transformative or not. Because referring back to my company, I have a lot of people in the northern western part of Germany that are likely to lose their job because of steel industry. At the same time, I'm building submarines in the north of Germany, and I don't have labor there. Yeah. And it's very hard today to change the rules of the labor market. So there is no other solution than a holistic solution. The plaidoyer should be about getting out of the silos. You reached, I thought, in your speech was very good. It's about secure infrastructure, trade or economy, and then innovation. And that needs to be a trinity.
And what role in this does more open trade with new partners play? Because if I picked up what you were saying earlier, you were critical of what's on the table between EU and India. And I think when it's talking about a fast track with India towards the end of the year, isn't it critical for Europe to open new markets?
But it is, and I'm not against an agreement with India. I'm just saying that in a world where interdependencies are important, we need to do that to look at that in a holistic way. Of course, we need to make an agreement. We also need to make agreements with parts of the world that are not even likely minded. I mean, I like the initiative of the alliance, but we will also have to make deals. We just need to have a holistic view on it and see what it means and use it to foster a transformation within Europe, which is inevitable and which has been coming for the last 3 decades.
Commissioner, you mentioned that Mr. Reynolds is traveling around the world, but so are you. How is that agenda going? I mean, you mentioned it was a line in your speech, if I picked it up correctly. You say that Europe or the EU will not do the kind of deal with the US that the UK has done. Clearly, it's a different economy. And I think it's a question also about the role, the way the EU sees its role in defense now of, say, fundamental principles of non-discrimination, etc. How confident are you that you can strike a deal with India that's acceptable to the steel industry, keep them on board in defense of a rules-based trade system, and in a sense avoid that they go into the Americans' game because that's their biggest and most important strategic priority? You can ask the question even as regards Japan. I think there was some positive news over the last weeks about EU structural dialogue or something like that with the CPTPP countries. Do you sense, the Trans-Pacific countries, 12 countries, do you sense when you talk to all these countries that they want to engage with the EU, they want to deepen markets with the EU, they want to maybe think together with the EU of what comes after this WTO that's breaking down? Or do you think that most of these countries in reality are in a business of managing the situation and saving their skin in discussions with the US and China rather than playing ball with the EU?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I think that, of course, we are doing our utmost to find the negotiated solutions with our US partners. At the same time, we are fully conscious that, of course, they represent a very important part of the global trade, but it's 13%. And I can tell you that we are working super hard to go after remaining 87%. And if there is any silver lining in this transformational paradigm shift period, is the fact that our phones are ringing non-stop. Therefore, I mean, we are spending so much time on the road because I think that I never felt such a huge interest in accelerating or launching free trade agreements with the EU. So with India, by the way, I just got the text message from Piyush Goyal again, and he likes to text. So
he's probably watching us.
He likes to text a lot. So
Let's have a look.
So I mean, clearly we are almost in daily contact. I think we had another round, I would say, this Monday in Paris, and I was very glad that my good colleague, the Agriculture Commissioner Christoph Hansen, joined me, so we can really go into the, I would say, deep discussion on agriculture-related trade. So India, I think there is clear political momentum. There is the political will on the top level. We are working very hard with Minister Goyal, and I'm pretty confident that we will find the solution as it was decided by the political leadership before the end of this year. But India is, of course, it's very important. It's 1.4 billion people. It's the most populous country on this planet, and the market will be growing from year to year. So it's a very important partner. Of course, the negotiations, I'm sure that Jonathan can testify, are not easy, but I think we'll get there. But on top of it, I can tell you that just a couple of days we spent together in Paris been pretty intense for me, not only because of this multilateral OECD agenda. We had a very good meeting with Australian trade minister, and we are re-engaging in our free trade agreement. We had a meeting with the Thailand minister who told me, let's conclude by the end of summer. And I can tell you that our DG Trade is getting pretty restless because there is so many negotiations going at the same time. I can say the same about Indonesia. We have another round of negotiations tomorrow with the trade minister who is coming here. Again, ambition is to accelerate as much as possible and to have a significant progress already by the summer of this year. As you know, I was in United Arab Emirates just the last week, and there is also potential for the quick progress. And I was very, enchanted by very sincere discussion we had with Saudi foreign trade minister, because I think now we found a way how to re-engage also on region to region, EU, GCC, free trade agreement, which was unfortunately stalled for many years, and I think we just missed the opportunity of the billions and billions of the mutual trade, and therefore what I'm trying to do is kind of to look at I would say these new fast track market access, if needed leaner trade agreements, which will get us the results easier. And I'm sure forgetting about Philippines. I didn't mention the South Africa where we had the meeting, and if I forget one of the negotiating partners, I really apologize, because it's a lot of countries with whom we are dealing at the same time. But I would end up on 2 points, if you allow me, Georg. One, it's a very important one, and you mentioned the comprehensive partnership, Trans-Pacific cooperation, the CPTPP. That's a new abbreviation. I think we'll be repeating quite often, because we've been very much encouraged by the support we got from the UK, from the chairmanship of Australia, from the New Zealand trade minister, whom I'm seeing, by the way, this afternoon, that they would like to have a structured cooperation with the EU. As you know, with many of the members of this Pacific group, we already have free trade agreements, but we believe that the group which represents 30% of the global trade, together with us, that we can really kind of work on new areas, new sectors which were not covered by the traditional free trade agreements, because e-commerce didn't exist 5 years ago. Digital trade was not so prominent. Yeah. We didn't put so much focus on critical raw materials. So all the free trade agreements which we have need upgrade. And we are doing that. And we can, I'm sure, strike the structural cooperation with such a big group of the countries. What would be absolutely essential, I think, would be to get the Ministerial Council of WTO in the next spring in Cameroon right. I think at least I don't know, Jonathan, what was your feeling, but my feeling, listening to all the colleagues around the table, was that we are kind of approaching the critical moment. Yeah. or we do it, and we would be able to reform WTO and not to kind of postpone endlessly, you know, all the topics which are on the table. From, I would say, how we transparently monitor the subsidies, how we deal with some agricultural products, can we finally solve the fisheries issue? There are so many things which I think make, in particular, our American partners super restless. And they say, you know, if you cannot do it through these multilateral negotiations, so we just go and we just simply enforce it in our way. And I think it's in our mutual interest to have WTO because it served us well. I mean, let's not forget this was the system which been building since the Second World War. I mean, all the trade on this planet is based on former GATT and WTO trading rules. So we shouldn't pull the rug from under, you know, how this international trade is doing. But without reforming it,
yes,
that would be very difficult.
Reforming it, trade negotiators are getting a lot of air miles these days. And I think what you're describing is an EU that has agency, that's acting, that's not only focusing on Washington, but focusing on this wider world. But WTO reform, getting to grips with the fundamental imbalances. You haven't mentioned Beijing in that context. Do you think you can get China on board in Cameroon to rewrite the rules that they've been distorting or playing with so that these imbalances, overcapacities, the non-market practices go away?
You want me to answer, or we will look
I
at Jonathan?
answer both. What do you think? Do you get
Jonathan
China?
scribbling the notes.
I'll try it. Just briefly, in response
he has a lot to say.
to Joachim on yours, I totally agree. Our own competitiveness has got to be at the core of this, and I totally agree there's far too much nostalgia sometimes in trade policy, clinging on to the past. I don't want to reopen the coal mines that were where I grew up in the northeast of England. But I do think it's harder to manage those transitions if the change you're experiencing is not one that brings a kind of reciprocal opportunity in another country, and that is at the core of it. And if you then create what the public see and are strategic weaknesses, and you look at the US position on industrial magnets right now, that's very hard. That's much harder, and that's sort of my point in terms of what you've got to recognise. But on WTO reform, I exactly agree with what Mara said, which is there's too much which is important to give up. I see it as, we have areas where we need rules that don't exist, particularly on labour and the environment to manage that. We need a dispute settlement system for the existing rules, which are very important. We need to ask ourselves the question if a lot of international institutions reflect the world as it is today.
Isn't this just old Europe regretting the past and what's gone? Dispute settlement, the Americans haven't been interested in having dispute settlement in the WTO.
I mean, it's very hard to ask countries to voluntarily give up privileged statuses, that's true. But I think there are ways you can. I mean, if you think about developing country status at the WTO, where some countries have voluntarily forgone that, recognising it's just people don't have any skin in the game that reflects the advanced nature and size of their economies, that's very, very hard to deal with that. So I think, look, unfortunately, hard as it is, some of the US agenda is forcing that to the fore. So that is all part of it. But where I think is a more reasonable prospect for development is how we can use international institutions to have greater transparency, greater monitoring. I mean, I would like to stand up in the House of Commons when, it's like as a trade minister, everyone says to you, I support free trade. However, in my area, my local company's got this problem. You need to have a way you can say there's an international process. We come together to assess this. We don't really have that. So it becomes a subjective assessment.
And you think that ultimately the push and the need for stability will sort of out-trump the disruption and the wish to upend the system. Trudy, you wanted to come in, you signaled.
Yeah, I as an international company which invests locally everywhere, I think all the three of us here know that building local supply chains is absolutely key to have people on board with the projects that you're doing and also to make them part of the success of it and not outsource that to another country. But at the same time, there is absolutely no way that this can be done without global trade. So, I mean, we have 8,000 direct suppliers to us that are global. Like you were saying in your speech, we're buying from all over the world. And at least one thing which I want to give praise to the Commissioner for is that the way that they are taking business and I think also labor and unions on board in being heard and having discussion at this time of super rapid changes, and you're doing maybe less multilateral and more bilateral agreements, and that you're actually sharing, being transparent, involving us in those discussions, because they impact us massively. So I think that is super important when you're making these deals.
We slowly have to start preparing for landing. We're a little bit over time already, but I wanted just to wrap this up by maybe taking the conversation back to economic security and also to the EU's agenda on that, Commissioner and others. I think what has been clear in a number of conversations so far is that economic security is about something different. It is about sort of intersection, interlinkages between the economy and security. And in the EU context, security is very often a national prerogative. And the second sort of intersection of economic security that's new is obviously, it requires very, very deep interaction between, if you're serious about it, and I think steel industry highlights that now, it's the question of, and you also mentioned that in your speech, about government working together with the private sector and setting, maybe a bit like China has done, setting common agendas and going from missions to actually achieving these. And I'm quite struck by, one experience, and we're discussing it with Darta here in the preparation of this, by how in the context of Russia's aggression of Ukraine, in the context of sanctions, Europe managed to shift gears. And managed to shift gears both in terms of making member states on difficult questions work together, but also making companies follow the logic on sanctions. And you're all nodding, and I think all your companies have been involved. Speaking to ship owners industry not long ago, and said in previous geopolitical crises, we always somehow tried to evade it a little bit because there were profits to make. Whereas in this crisis, sanctions have broadly been respected. Are we now in a moment of shifting gears also in economic security? And Commissioner Šefčovič, do we have that capacity? Is that your mandate as Commissioner not only for trade but economic security in the next 4 or 5 years, to be able to bring everybody along in terms of risk assessments, in terms of shaping up industry, to be more competitive, but also to resist? Is this sort of the positive message and agenda that we need to take from conversations like this, and that, in a sense, the EU has been forged in crisis, and we are really facing a crisis now, and this is what we need to succeed with?
Well, thank you very much for that question. I mean, if you look at the composition of the current Commission, the fact that economic security made it to the high prominence was also demonstrated in kind of changing my job title. That I'm not only responsible for trade but also economic security. We even renamed our DG, so it would be very, very clear. But but going beyond, I would say this visual elements, we also got very, very, very clear task that we have to develop the economic security doctrine. It's a heavy word, of course. But what we mean by that is that it would be a very, very thorough document, which should be, of course, which we are preparing right now, where we are consulting widely the industry, and therefore I really would like to thank Trude, but also Ilse for not only being here, but for making sure that your companies, your sectors are coming to us with ideas where they feel we need to work much more as institutions, as a government, if I'm talking about the member states and the private sector. You're also right, Georg, that economic security was, I would say, until like 2-3 years ago, until COVID and war in Ukraine, very national prerogative. The member states didn't want us to go anywhere close to it, because we've been talking about Wassenaar, we've been talking about dual regime, we've been talking about security, military implications. But it was before the time when we realized that medicaments supplies could be weaponized. It was before the time when we realized that what can you do with the shortage of the energy supplies, or cutting the gas provisions to the European economy. It was before the time when just the shortage of magnets or shortage of chips could hold the whole production of the cars in the European Union. So we suddenly realized that actually this interlink between hardcore security, economic security, and economic performance is much more close, much more refined than we thought before. And therefore, because we know how sensitive this is for the member states, so we are permanently talking in different groups and compositions to member states, because we want to go at a pace they are comfortable with. And I think we are achieving that, and that realization that we are now living in the new era is clearly there. When I met the Chinese trade minister 2 days ago, I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the magnets, you know, about the new system they introduced, and how important it is to have transparency, to have the proper supplies of this very important commodity for our industry. And we agree that this would, of course, be one of the regular topics we would be discussing, as many others. But I believe that we need this engagement, and we need to kind of not only talk about it in a kind of global, comprehensive way, but to go topic after topic, commodity after commodity, just to simply make sure that we have this better understanding how important it is. If you allow me to conclude, because I think that it's very important, not only for the ladies on this panel, but for the general audience, to highlight the fact that we know that our businesses, our industry, and especially our energy-intensive industry goes through very challenging times. And when I'm meeting, like the colleagues, for example, from the steel sectors, of course there is a lot we could do, and we are doing through simplification. There is a lot of, I would say, policies we would need to adjust, but they've been telling me that if there is something what we can do rapidly, that's only trade.
Yeah.
And therefore, what we did was we introduced the steel and metal and action plan just a few weeks ago, where we simply just want to be much more cautious how we work with the quota, what we do with that, how we would control what is happening, I would say, on the steel market, to be sure that we develop new system to be very clear and know exactly where the steel comes from, if it's within, you know, the quotas we agreed, and simply to get it under much better control. And I know that one of your calls is that you want to have the clarity what would happen in this post-safeguard 2026 period, and you want to have it as early as possible. And my message here is that we are working on it, and I hope that we will be having more concrete proposals to present by the summer of this year. Excellent. What it means, the last point, is that clearly we are going for the period where all this would be much more important than before. Rules of origin, local content, much more, I would say, transparency and checks. We need our customs to be able to work in the 21st century digital environment. We need to be much faster in responding, because in that way we can kind of also impose, if I can use that word, a little bit more transparency also on our global partners, global players, that if we have a deal with you, respect it and make sure that also your companies respect it, and we will have the means to check if this is really the case and to adjust it if needed. So that would be something, I think, what clearly would be kind of markers of this new trading period. And thank you, Georg, for letting me finish.
Thank you, Commissioner. Of course, Ilse, you're the other side of this equation very much. And Joachim, when he spoke earlier, he talked about not public-private partnership, but redefining the role of the state as a market participant. Is all this going fast enough? Or you wanted to come in and comment?
Yeah, so as I said before, speed is a quality of its own, but I did want to stress that we appreciate that you are the Commissioner of Global Trade and Economic Security. I think it shows the holistic approach that we know, so that's very much appreciated, and we're very confident that we will achieve good things together. And what I wanted to say is actually, as companies ourselves, we also need to rethink our positioning. And we should not underestimate that there have been advantages that we have profited from, which are now endangering economic security. We have deliberately built very global, non-resilient supply chains. And we also have a task. So I think each of us has a role to play. We have to redefine where do we want to play, what is the competitive field we want to be in, and economic security is something that we need to achieve by ourselves, and needs to be a collaboration between the two. And I think in terms of helping us out, I think what we need is, there's a lot of talks about should we reduce bureaucracy, etc. I think what we need is another kind of governance. In Europe, we should not deregulate as much as many others are doing, because that would put at risk our values that are so determining for us. So I think it's about implementing another kind of governance, not deregulating, but a bureaucracy that allows us to deal with complexity much more than just trying to reduce it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have to wrap up now. It's been a very interesting conversation. There are plenty of other things to unpack. I had planned to ask you whether you thought we would have Chinese connected vehicles on European roads in 5 and 10 years. The Americans enforcing a ban. I will not ask you to answer that. We're getting a presentation on that later. But thank you, all of you, for joining us, the time you spent, and how you engaged in this conversation. Clearly, there's a lot more to work on. We have a number of other fascinating sessions coming up, one on technology, one on level playing field, and one not least on global partnerships. So thank you so much for kicking this off. A round of applause to all of you.